Hello and welcome to the Freedom Anarchist News Review. Tonight we have Andy Micah with us. Hello, Andy. And we have
Hello.
a good slate of stuff for your delectation. We have Juryless Trials, a fantastic idea from the usual suspects. Um, we also have Wildfires and heatwave death toll creep. Grok going full Nazi, which apparently you can't put on the headlines of YouTube these days. Filton 18 and prescription protest arrests, which we will deal with carefully. Property developer Cartel offers £100 million to buy off a probe into cartel behaviours. And Rishi Sunak joining Goldman Sachs, the world's most surprising development from the former head of the Tory party. So starting with juryless trials, Andy, what are the implications of this?
All right. First, a disclaimer: I have not read all 388 pages of Lord Justice Leveson's.
Slacker.
What he has got 42 proposals, which I've skim read, and pretty much it's what you'd say on the tin. At the moment, if you are risking a jail sentence of more than 6 months, you can opt to have a jury. Under the proposals, without going through the complexities of them, that will shift to around 3 years before you can get a jury, and possibly higher. There's some flexibility built into it. Now, as Simon points out, this one's come around a few times in the past. The trouble is, at the moment, the justice system is in such disarray, and slightly honestly, Leveson admits the first reason is inadequate funding for many, many years. Although he then moans about the complexity of trials these days, which just means that defence lawyers want to see the evidence. But there is not an easy way out of this blockage in which we are getting cases listed for Crown Court trials as late as 2029 at the moment. And what he would do in getting rid of the juries and shifting a lot of the cases into the magistrates would speed up the process. And since the government has no intention whatsoever of putting more money into the system, it is very likely that it will go through. It's hard to see. The government has a massive majority. The Tory party is not going to lead a fight for freedom. David Davis might say something, and that's about it. So leaves you
Fighting a
with the
good
Liberal
fight.
Democrats and the Greens. So it is very bad and it's very dangerous. Very likely to happen. Obviously, we will have to mobilise and do what we can, but it is to give you an obvious example. The good old-fashioned smacking a copper. At the moment, you'll be charged with assault emergency worker, face a maximum of 2 years, and you can go before the 12 honest and true and explain that it was in self-defense or defending other people or preventing crime, and they might believe you. The magistrates never will. And the new division of the Crown Court, which will be a Crown Court judge with two magistrates, is no better. So yeah, bad news all round, but we'll see how long it takes them to fight it through. But yeah, I think we have to be prepared for this actually getting there.
Is it something which you reckon is going to be able to? Because the problem is always that changes to the legal system can come across as very dry. Even and sort of even saying, look, your long-standing rights to a jury trial, this thing which is kind of totemic within the British legal system. I can quite easily see people just being like, it's just changes to how the law works. I'm not going to get arrested, so I don't care. in terms of like where mobilization is likely to come from, I suppose, where are we talking about? I mean, I suppose Liberty, Amnesty International, maybe. Um, like whether the left would bother is a difficult one to call. Um,
Um, uh, Good friends at Netpol. It
Again,
it
fighting the good fight.
requires
Um,
it requires a strike by defence barristers and solicitors who refuse to represent clients who are not getting a jury trial. That's the only way I can see of actually stopping it. If you have a strong enough amount or percentage of defence lawyers refusing to do those trials, meaning that they go to people having to represent themselves, that would shut it down, and they would have to do that on a completely principled basis at a massive risk to their own money and potential future careers. It's a big ask, but in terms of short of other social change, uh, that is the only real way I can see of mobilising, because there is, as our friend um, good old Roger Hallam has learnt, the getting people in jail system does not work to stop legal changes. Otherwise, burglary would have been made legal years ago, because there's thousands of people in jail for doing it. So yeah, I think it is a question of mobilising the legal um, system itself, and there may very well be some judges who object to it. Not going to be many magistrates though.
is it is it the sort of thing where, I mean, are defense lawyers likely to be motivated to do something like that? Or, and is there a way in which obviously the general public could push for them to become more motivated?
I mean, people can who are facing those sort of trials can kick up a fuss, and that's relatively easy for us and a small minority of protest defendants. You can get up in the court and say this court isn't fair. I'm not recognising its authority, and if you're done an accountable action, you're going to be found guilty of anyway. That you're not at a much of a disadvantage. For the vast majority of good, honest criminals, uh, they are desperately trying to get the best result that they can out of their individual situation. And kicking up a fuss in court is not a way to go about that. So yeah, I can't say I'm confident, but I think that we basically have to do a very attack on good old British liberty type campaign. Um, for not that British liberty has got a great record, as many of our viewers may have noticed over the years.
Yeah, no, it's yeah, I suppose if you happen to know any defense lawyers, particularly younger ones who can get mobilized and all that kind of stuff, then persuade them to take a crack, I suppose. But yes, we'll have to see whether we can get the Civil Liberties crew on the case. Um, Moving on, so we have the next one we've got on the list is wildfires and the heatwave death toll creep, which is a rather broader topic. But in brief, the heat is thought to the most recent heat wave is thought to have caused 2,300 deaths across 12 cities in Europe, of which 1,500 were down to the climate crisis, according to scientists. Now, obviously, only going through the 12 cities suggests that the actual death count is considerably higher overall in Europe. Um, it's uh, it's an interesting one that our direct action crew, when it comes to this stuff, is currently on a hiatus of some kind, and the movement in Britain does not seem to be towards greater efforts, let alone greater lobbying of other countries towards greater efforts. Um, I guess the other question is in terms of how we as non-parliamentary actors can look at these kinds of changes. Obviously, there is the campaigning to stop it and to, fight for less pollution to go in the air. But the main thing at this point is probably mitigation, right? Um, and we did have for a while a campaign not stop insulation, more insulation campaign. Um, that kind of campaign, I think, is potentially a more popular one with the general public than we might get with more negative campaigns in terms of what people shouldn't be doing and what governments shouldn't be doing. But obviously, it is very limited. Um, what in terms of the state of play as it is now, in terms of kind of, I mean, again, in terms of how we react to increasing numbers of wildfires in the UK, even. What thoughts do you have in terms of the reading you've done and the prior writing that's been done on the subject from anarchists?
Well, it's I hate to be doom and gloom monger of the show, but things are bad. And in my very brief time as editor, we had the COP conference that year in Copenhagen, I think 2009, and I ran a headline on the old print copy of Freedom saying we're doomed. And the the difficulty with climate change all along the line is that the results are so much further away than the immediate causes, and people do not have the tendency, like the proverbial frog, to jump out of the boiling pan before it gets too hot to do the jumping. And with XR, Extinction Rebellion, and um, Insulate Britain, then Just Stop Oil, it's almost as if there was a premature wave of action that has burnt people out before there was enough of popular backing to force real change on a government. And we have seen in the last few years, as other issues have become prominent, that climate change has been dialed down in the same way we saw the anti-globalization movement of the late 90s, early 2000s disappear when suddenly Islamic terrorism was the main threat. And if you're a conspiracy theorist, these things are cooked up, or they are just more likely exploited and provoked by the nature of the capitalist international system that causes crisis because it can't help not doing so. Because, as I think we've been arguing since Kropotkin was going on about ecology, capitalism is incapable of long-term thought because it works on a profit motive. Oh dear me, that's not very good. People should reorganize. People should get out in the streets and organize in their workplace to shut things down. That's what I say.
So it should, although I think the point about Kropotkin is an important one, in as much as I think there is value in pointing out, look, we have been saying that this would happen, this very thing would happen for a century plus. And as with the slow, long breakdown of parliamentary um, democracy in and of itself, you know, the time has very much been proving our point about capitalism's tendencies, about the way in which parliamentary democracy ratchets further and further to the right unless you've got a willing and able social mass able to push back against its tendencies to do so. Um, and that this should be proof positive that movements are going to have to accept that the state is not going to just, I mean, as we are discovering at the moment with the likes of proscription and the removal of juries and the making protest illegal unless the police give you direct um, permission to do so, and the idea that right in the sunbeam there.
Sorry.
And no, it's just later. Um, and the way in which they keep trying to legislate for things like being annoying as a protest problem, and the fact is that without again breaking the law by saying you like the government cannot be effectively resisted without breaking the law, that itself would be an illegal thing to say. Um, the number of legitimate options do seem to be rapidly running out in terms of things that can make the government sit up and take notice. Um, and the anarchist analysis in that sense has been right all along, in that every time something is done which is even vaguely um, effective, the government very rapidly comes up with a law or a policy or some form of, some form of methodology to shut it down and make it illegal and dangerous to do. Um, and a century or more ago, people were much more in the position where they were able to take that on the chin and say, well, yeah, I mean, Kropotkin famously had to go on the run from the Russian state for most of his life because he was unable to resist the Russian state without the Russian state saying, fine, we will bang you up in St. Peter's prison forever. Uh, it's a yeah, it is a bleak situation, but it is also one which, to a degree, puts us back in a situation where we have been before to a point. The experiment of liberal democracy collapsing is not necessarily the end of resistance, um, and I think it's worth bearing that in mind.
Yeah, how big a disaster do we need for people to say we've got to do something? And obviously, with the leader of the free world being a complete climate denial, and yet having just had what's happened in Texas with 100 plus people killed in a flood, which is so obvious to us a product of climate change, but Trump denies it. And I suppose with America, you look back at uh, Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans. Uh, we thought at that point people might wake up, but it's quite amazing what people can just say. Oh well, that happened. It's just nature. How big a thing do you need?
I think it's an interesting one, like about Palestine rather than climate change, but it seems to be very much the case that there is, like we occasionally predict in a kind of mild mannered way that, oh, when the government does something repressive, it does tend to make people sit up and take note to a degree. And it does tend to push certain parts of society into a more rebellious form rather than a less one. Um, but the evidence has tended to show that the government's increasingly repressive actions over Palestine have been doing that. Kneecap and Bob Villain have been the obvious cases in things which are still legal terms, um, which uh, both of them have been, blacklisted by, they've been dropped by their respective um, agents. They've been banned from going to various festivals. They've been on every news channel with people saying, they need to be arrested and they need to be, silenced essentially. And in one case, they are one of them is on trial for a alleged terror offence of a flag in the background, and the other one is being investigated as a potential criminal case. And in both cases, Bob Villain is now top of the charts. Kneecap is doing sellout showings, um, and I thought there was a very interesting. So Spiked wrote on one of its rare occasions of writing something vaguely interesting despite itself. Um, Wrote a piece in which the author was desperately trying to say Bob Villain and Kneecap are conformist because they are cleaving to the youth, and it's all this kind of just following the trend of Palestine support and all this kind of stuff. And you're just reading this guy, and just being like, this man in his, I would imagine, 60s, who's probably never been in trouble with the law before, blathering on about these groups who have upset the state so much that the state has very specifically set the cops on them, and saying these people are conformists. It's just like this disconnect from reality and this desperation to try and flip the script in a way which is really quite pathetic. Um, it does to me hint at least the beginnings of a popular reassessment of what rebellion is. I think for the last 10 years, the right has been able to claim the mantle of rebellion because it's standing up against a status quo of social progressivism. And I don't think that is the case anymore. I think that that's dying in part because, well, partly because liberals have given up on it and are just embracing things like transphobia, but also because they are now in power. And being in power means that you, by definition, can't be the rebels. Um, so I think that's something which is it has the potential to give us a lot more oomph than we've had in quite a while. So certainly culturally, how what that converts to is up in the air.
Yeah, on Palestine in general, I am more positive. I really feel that we are in a very similar to the position that we were in the late 80s, early 90s on South Africa. The younger generation, the majority of the British public are shifting to a position that a racist state is untenable. And the establishment ruling class haven't worked out that shift is happening beneath their feet. And that in many ways the the task is more to make sure that that does not spiral off into anti-Semitism, and that people concentrate on that you can get rid of a racist state without descending into a new wave of hatred on the other side. So yeah, that is I think something that in the quite medium term we are winning on, and again the opposite of climate change globally we're winning on. It is just because Israel has done very well in the recent wars that has actually made their position far more untenable in a global and long term sense. The frightening question there is, does that end in peaceful transition? Step forward the Palestinian Nelson Mandela, please, or or does it end in some sort of horrible nuclear holocaust because the Israelis really do have nuclear weapons and plenty of them? South Africa did, by the way. They only had six, but they dismantled them before the transition. Strangely enough, it is possible.
Yeah, I mean, I think Israel using a nuclear bomb, I would think is a remote possibility because, I mean, ultimately it's completely indefensible. And Israel still does rely on at least a rhetorical defense to justify support from the West. I think a nuke is one of those step too far jobs that they're unlikely to do. But who knows? They've done some completely bonkers shit over the course of this year already. So um, On that similar note, I suppose we've sort of already touched on the Filton 18 and the prescription protest arrests, in terms of kind of both the legal case and the social case. But in terms of where we are with that set of arrests, I think we were talking about this a little before we started. But you were saying that they are now out and will be waiting for their court case. You seemed quite optimistic that they weren't going to be going down for years and years on end.
Oh, you meant the Saturday arrests at Parliament Square?
Yeah, yeah. Sorry, not
Yeah,
the Filton 18
the
themselves. They'd already
Filton
been
18,
arrested.
the aggravated burglary arrests, they're still inside, and they will be until trial. Um, uh, they are the arms factory in Bristol case. There's a hearing this week, which I don't have the details of. We will obviously update people on what defences they're going to be allowed at trial, and you can bet that they are not ones involving international law and preventing crimes and genocide. Those the judge will rule out. So there's not much point in trooping down to Woolwich or the Old Bailey, wherever it's being held, to listen to Mr. Jeremy Johnson tell you that exactly what we know he's going to rule on. But they are facing very long sentences of 5 to 10 year category, because aggravated burglary is very serious, and there's also a GBH charge in there. There's obviously a lot of other cases, and what I think saying on the reassurance front is that if you are supporting a defendant who was involved in a Palestine Action thing, it does not make you a member of Palestine Action or a supporter of Palestine Action to continue to defend and support them, or to write to them if they're in prison. All Unless, of course, you explicitly say, I support Palestine Action, or by your actions and deeds do the same thing. But you are as entitled to support the individuals facing trial as you are someone accused of any other offence. Even if they've been found guilty, you can still support prisoners, because you are not endorsing their crime, you are just supporting them as human beings. So people should keep up the solidarity. I will mention uh, Bristol Defendant Solidarity, who have a fundraiser going to support prisoners, includes people who are still inside, for the Bristol Kill the Bill demonstration of some years ago, and some other prisoners scattered around the world. So if you've got spare money, give to that. Um, don't give it to any more fundraisers for Palestine Action, because the money will be seized, and you don't need to give it to the crowdfunder for justice to get them deprescribed, because that raised about 300,000 anyway. So more than sufficient.
Should be
So
plenty.
give what money you can to actual defendant support.
Also probably worth a quick shout out to Netball, who, if you're worried about what you can and cannot write, they have done an explainer, um, which is very helpful of them. Moving on. So we have, one I missed was Grok going full Nazi. So I don't know whether you came across this, Andy, but last couple of days. So Elon Musk did this whole big deal about saying Grok has gotten too liberal because it's been taking in media from all the wrong places, and it's been turning its head. So I'm going to rewrite it to be more realistic. And after said rewrite, it started sounding like Goebbels on acid, and declared itself Mecha Hitler at one stage. And basically was going off on one about how if you want to get things done, then Hitler's your man. It was really quite something. It has now been, I think, called back a little bit, so it's not doing it. But um, it was a wonderful example of a phenomenon that the right has been doing again and again, in which reality does not stack up against what it would like to be true, so it tries to rewrite reality. And in Elon Musk's case, this has been particularly startling But it adds to a long trend of things like Conservapedia, um, and the banning of various books and etc. over time. Um, and obviously with Trump's removal of any DEI content from state servers, uh, I think I mean it's a funny case, but also it's one which should very much, if people aren't already aware to it, AI is not a neutral, or more realistically, large language models are not a neutral thing. They are, as much as any technology, built by and for the ruling class, with sometimes explicitly the aim of directing the working class towards particular ends. Um, and whilst the at the moment, certain elements of AI are difficult for them to truly control because the way that LLMs work, they suck in vast amounts of data. And in order to have that vast amount of data, it can't really discriminate between just right wing data and just left wing data. Um, but it is very much something which clearly is on their minds.
Yeah, I was always obviously because of the Robert Heinlein link, who invented the word grok in one of his books, Moon is a Harsh Mistress, I think. I was just reminded of another of his, Starship Troopers. When the film came out, it was an obvious parody of militarism, and yet it became incredibly popular with far right nuts who thought that blasting all alien life into smithereens was a really great idea, and that only people who'd fought in the war could be citizens was an even better idea. That is the horror of sarcasm is and satire is that is once again being taken totally literally. It's a very depressing thing because AI should be spreading information in a way that we've never had it before. It's really helpful if like I was this afternoon, just checking how many rounds of ammunition all the world's main battle tanks have. You get really quick answers. It's just that if you start sticking in questions about how much armor they can penetrate, you just get born. Um,
um, yeah, no, it's very much one of the great problems of modern society. I am just about old enough that the internet became a thing when I was in my teens and early adult years, and I remember the pre-internet period, or the mostly pre-internet period, in which finding information was the issue, right? Like, it was there, but in order to, for example, get information about anarchism, you had to go to somewhere like Freedom, you had to pick up a paper, you had to buy a couple of books, you had to actually, like, you know, you had to get a flyer, go to a pub, ask someone where to go to find more anarchist stuff, go to that place where the anarchist stuff was and buy it. And there was a whole chain of events which you needed to go through to reach the information that you wanted. And it sometimes required phoning people and etc. It was a real task. Whereas a few years later, it was very much, in the early years of Google, um, it became suddenly you could find the entire world's information just right at your fingertips. The Library of Alexandria Plus was all there for you. And it was hailed as this kind of amazing thing that was going to revolutionize our lives, and to a degree it did. But also it flipped the question of data from there isn't enough and you need to find it to it's all there and you need to drag it out from the absolute pile of nonsense that already exists and is only growing minute by minute. Um, and this is something which, one of the reasons I'm still uh, a print media junkie, is that you can hand someone print media and say, this is what I think. Or they can find it, or they can, discover it randomly in a pub or in a shop or whatever. And it can start changing minds. Whereas through the internet, it's there, but you have to know where to look to find it. You're not going to just happen across it in the same way necessarily. Um, and I think the problem with AI is that actually uh, ramps that up further. Large language models, they find you an answer. And as you say, if it's something like how many shells can an Abrams take, then sure, there's one answer to that question. Um, but if it's a broad question about politics, if it's asking a system that is set up to give one answer about anarchism, what is anarchism? And it tells you anarchism is chaos and burning things down and throwing bombs at stuff. Um, that's what you take away from it. And it weaponizes the tendency of people to look for one quick answer in a way that, again, draws them away from the possibility of just happening across the correct answer or the real answer or an alternative answer. And I think that's very dangerous. And the way in which Elon Musk is doing it is a direct weaponization of that concept. And it's clownish in this case, but as we know, fascists go from clownish to dangerous to lethal in short order quite often.
Yeah, we are in that point where there are very, very few people with memory of the Second World War or actual Nazism in action, and it's become a theoretical thing, and people have got no reference to how fucking bad it is. And yeah, that does make it scary times that references to that can be brushed off as a joke by the likes of Elon.
Yeah. Um, all right. So moving on, how are we doing? 8 to 10. Okay, that's fine. We have two more to do. We have, first of all, property developer Cartel offers £100 million to buy off a probe into their activities. And this is house builders. Seven of the UK's biggest house builders have agreed to pay a total of 100 million quid after an investigation by the Competition and Markets Authority, which unearthed evidence last year that commercially sensitive information, including on prices, had been transmitted between companies. This is straightforwardly cartel behaviour. The companies which have been doing this, very few of them will be unknown to people. This is Barratt Redrow, Bellway, Barclay, Bloor Homes, Persimmon, Taylor Wimpey, and Vistry. And everybody will be good Lord, everybody will be happy to hear that they have agreed to legally binding commitments that will prevent them doing it again. And if you believe that, I have a bridge to sell you.
Yeah. Um, Misconduct in public office. I'm not sure whether that will be in the under 3 years category, the actual maximum's life at the moment. But uh, yeah, that's the crime that the government agreeing to this really should be done with if the laws were applied fairly and equitably to all without fear or favour. But yeah, shocking but not surprising is I think into that bucket it goes.
It's quite a given how much dramatic shenanigans are going on over the last year in particular, but the last few, it feels a little bit like a kind of old-fashioned callback. Just standard corporate cartel behavior, price fixing, all this kind of stuff. It's been going on since year dot, but just like a straightforward companies do a fix up which screws over the general public to maximize their profits and then get away with it with no one being arrested. And no, and the only consequences being 100 million quid, which almost certainly represents a bare percentage of what they've made in profit from the whole deal. I remember back in the day that would have been a huge deal. That would have been front page news. That would have been protests outside company headquarters. And now we've got so much other stuff to just it. It's the flooding the zone, as Steve Bannon likes to put it. The thing there's so much bonkers stuff going on that you just end up looking at it going, oh yeah, another case of that one, is it? Um,
Yeah, the 18th century quote of Thurlow that you can't expect a corporation to have a conscience because it's got no soul to be damned and no body to be kicked. Bears in mind the whole idea of fining corporations when they just have to steal more money off the working class is really yeah, it's hopeless.
and it's the
Uh,
sort of thing which, like, I actually think this is something which the left could make a big deal of, right? Like the traditional left. We can kind of sit here and be jaded and cynical about it without getting really riled up, because limited energy, etc. But it is the sort of thing which actually it's a big deal in terms of if you're talking to the general public, for example, about reasons for the housing crisis, and the way in which reform loves to weaponize migration, right? And they say the reason for the housing crisis is there's too many foreigners in the country. Um, and people kind of do this half-assed thing of saying, well, it's not really that. It's also that, there's these problems with uh, market prices being too high and people all moving to the wrong place or moving to the same place all at once. And, the way in which which government regulations push the prices up and all this kind of stuff, which is kind of, it's ticky-tacky, half legalisticy. It's not really a to the jugular approach on reasons why you're being screwed over by both the government, by a state corporate compact, right? Which is what it is. Like the housing crisis is a state corporate compact to drive up prices, to maximize profit and rip off the working class. That's what it is. Um, but something like a straightforward, this is happening because a group of seven companies has just gotten away with blue murder, like by paying off a watchdog which does not have the power to properly go after the people who made the decisions to do this, people with names and addresses who deliberately, with malice aforethought, ripped you and everybody else off, in order to do this. Um, that should be the sort of thing which, I would, in days prior, I would expect the equivalent of Novara or Jacobin or Tribune as is, or as Red Pepper before they went under on and all the rest of it, and the old guard in the Labour left and the cobweb left to go full tilt against a story like that. I'm not even sure they've noticed.
yeah. Uh, Tell us
But,
about Sunak.
a similar case. They want to round us off. Um, Rishi Sunak has joined Goldman Sachs in the most surprising outcome. Just an absolute golden age period, revolving door. Financier goes back to financier. Technocrats paid off from day one. The quote is fantastic on Rishi Sunak. I'll see if I can dig it out. Um, because it was talking about the approval required for him to do this. So after leaving the bank, after leaving Goldman Sachs originally, Sunak worked at TCI, and then went into politics and got the job as PM. And he first sought approval for the job in May and was told to wait until July, which is 1 year since the anniversary of him leaving Downing Street, before he could announce this. You know, in which absolutely, a year just rubs off all of those sharp edges, right? And this is the official government watchdog that's telling him this is the right way of doing it. And in a letter to Sunak published on Tuesday, Goebbels said there was a risk that Sunak would advise Goldman on matters that overlap with the responsibilities held in government, and the appointment could be seen to offer unfair access and influence within the UK government. Because he used to run everything and knew all of the civil servants by name and has all of their phone numbers. Um, as a result, he will be restricted from some activities for a whole extra year on the grounds that presumably by then the civil service will have completely replaced its entire personnel. None of the MPs or cabinet secretaries or anything will still be in post. But this includes lobbying the government on behalf of Goldman, using Whitehall contacts to influence policy, or advising the bank in relation to bids or contracts with the government. And again, 2 years, there won't be any contracts left which he would have any knowledge of or inside or ability to inside trade. The decision said your role within the Goldman Sachs Group should be limited to providing advice on strategy, macroeconomic, and clear geopolitical matters that don't conflict with your time as Prime Minister. And it does bring to mind, yes, Minister, essentially. The whole thing of yes, once you're retired, you just won't talk to those people. All of those old friends of yours, you'll just look the other way, or you'll have conversations which will daintily dance around the subjects on which you might have a say, but in fact it'll be, you know, the old boys network. You're all sat with no recording devices around you in the old clubs talking about all of these things. Who's going to be checking under these circumstances? It's the whole self-policed dividing line. It's just it's one of the funniest bits of malarkey that government does, in my view, and they all do it. And obviously, like if reform gets in, they'll do it as well. But the conceit of it is so laughably bad. I sometimes wonder why they keep doing it.
I mean, I was to say this for Goldman Sachs, their standards have gone up. It used to be if you were head boy at school, you could get in. But maybe they view the Prime Minister of Britain as no more than a head boy who's entitled to check people were wearing their ties properly. And now they've qualified for a real job, making proper money.
Yeah. I mean, he's done his time at the coal face of government, and now it's time for the 20 years of sitting back, just watching the money roll in, and more of it. Amazing, really. Like this is the system that we all live with, and nobody bats an eyelid at it. He'll get a lordship in due course, and many other gongs. But yeah, that I think, unless we've got any other things which I've forgotten or we should bring up.
Goodbye, Norman Tebbit.
Oh yes, yes. Alas, dear Tebbit, we knew you well. And points to the Guardian, and by points I mean Jesus, guys, for letting the Conservative Home deputy editor write a hagiography dedicated to Tebbit on their pages. Just sometimes there's an entire thread which I occasionally frequent on Urban 75, the anarcho grump forum, for people who don't know it, which is the Guardian's gone down the pan, and it was just and it just lists of articles like that one. It's like, what is the editorial reasoning behind embarrassing yourselves like this? But a particular corker, if people, I wouldn't recommend reading it. It's every bit as bad as you would expect it to be. All right, so on that, should I say positive note? Only the good die young, etc., etc. We can sign off for the evening.
Yeah.
I think. Thank you very much, Andy, for
Yes,
turning
thanks,
out,
Simon.
for, as ever, your words of wisdom and knowledgeable legal brain. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in and listening, and we shall see you again next week.